Welcome to all our participants. Good afternoon to our speaker from Australia. Thank you for joining us for this exclusive masterclass for CBSE school leaders on levers for leading. My name is Aditi Agarwal and I work for the Australian Trade and Investment Commission in India. I will start with some housekeeping information. Today's session will be for a duration of 1 hour and 30 minutes. This session is also being live streamed on CBSE Academic YouTube channel. So if any of you are facing technical issues, request you to please visit the link shown on the screen. At the end of the session, we will be taking questions. In order to ask a question, please type your question in the chat window in the right side of the panel or use the live chat session if you are attending through YouTube chat. Australia is recording this webinar and we will be sharing the recorded version of the session after the end of the session. Please note that the audio quality may fluctuate during the webinar. In case you have audio-related issues, please check your headset and audio settings. And if the issue still persists, please disconnect and connect back again. In case of any network disruption, please stay online and we will connect back in a few minutes. Australian government has been taking initiatives to support the sector during the challenging start to 2020. We have launched Australia Virtual Masterclass Series, partnering with some of the finest Australian institutions to introduce you to Australia's quality education and enable you to smoothly transition to online teaching. The Professional Development Series for school leaders started last week and ends today with this exclusive session on leadership. We believe it is a great campaign that has united the education community during the difficult time. A big thank you to Dr. Viswajit Saha and the Central Board of Secondary Education for extending support to our program. If you would like a deeper experience of Australian education during lockdown, you can discover the wealth of educational expertise Australia has to offer by searching for the Study Australian Connection or the Future Learn platform. Australia will also be launching the 2020 edition of the Schools Video Competition very soon. We will keep you posted on the dates and details of the competition. In this competition, we have the brightest and talented students showcase their knowledge across various topics where they create exciting videos and upload the same on YouTube. The winners in the past have traveled to Australia, and this year we will be back with more excitement in terms of the prizes. I would now like to introduce our academic, Professor John Fischetti. Professor John is Pro-Vice Chancellor of the Faculty of Education and Arts and recent Dean of Education and Head of School at the University of Newcastle. He is currently President of New South Wales Council and Dean of Education. John's key research interests include school reform, preparing leaders for new roles and responsibilities, secondary teacher education, global education issues curriculum, instruction and assessment technology and education research in teaching and learning. His over the last 35 years he's been focusing on rethinking pedagogy, assessment, schooling, and teacher education. I'm sure all the educators are looking forward to hear from you, John. Over to you, Professor John.
Thank you for the invitation. It's wonderful. We have an exciting time in the world today with so many events that are merging at the same time. But I want to start today with my deepest appreciation and thanks to each of you as school leaders, head teachers, as well as other participants who have joined today for what you're doing to keep hope alive during this COVID-19 epidemic. It's rather shocking, the situation that we're in that has moved us from teaching face-to-face to teaching from home. Some of you are in schools that may have come back a little bit. We're fortunate in Australia now to have moved back into the situation where we are back in school. And we're fully back in school with just a few families who have children who are vulnerable, who are back in their homes studying. So we have greatest sympathy and love for all people online. India is such a fantastic country with just amazing people, and the pressures you've been under, the stresses you've been under are so horrific because you're trying to keep hope alive during a pandemic and keep learning going at the same time. Thank you for everything you've done. The topic for today is one that I hope will resonate with you, but for some of you, it may be just looking past COVID. So I hope today you might be able to look just beyond the crisis we're in. And I'm calling this levers or levers, depending on how you accentuate your English, for leading. And think of a lever as a pulley or a device which allows you to control the direction of your school. And I'm also using a paint palette as an example. Picture that you have all the colors, and on the paint palette, then you can find the opportunity to paint a picture for your school. I'll get into what the levers mean. This presentation will be all there and explaining it, I hope, momentarily. Thank you for everything you're doing. As educators, you are helping make the world such a better place at this complex time. One of my mantras is that for too long, schools have been places that young people go to watch their teachers work. If you take that in a minute, it's designed to be a little bit of a humorous statement, but at least in my own education, coming out of the 1960s and 70s when I went to primary and secondary school, we sat in rows, we listened to teachers, there was a lot of talking, and then there was a test. That's where we're moving away from in the best pedagogies in the world. And some of you are leading that, I know, all across your sector. I think that we're holding on to the schools that we know rather than inventing and evolving the schools that we need. And that assessment is holding us back. And for some of you, you are doing so well in state and national and province assessments. But on the other hand, the assessments may be limiting. So many of you have been put in positions because of your great teaching ability, and you've been made instructional leaders. Instructional leadership is the number one goal of being a school leader at whatever level, from the classroom to head teacher, to deputy or assistant principal to principal. But school leaders have the figurative color palette in front of them as they paint the picture of and for their schools. They can use this imaginary color wheel to determine with their executives, their leadership teams, their faculties, and their communities what approaches they would like to enable student success. I'd be happy to share the content of this video. I'm not going to play it because of the different bandwidths, but I'd like to take you to my journey to think about that what our goal is school transformation. And some of you may use different philosophical labels for it, but my definition of school transformation is that we actually accomplish learning for all. That we're at a time in the evolution of mankind where it's required that every young person discover their passions and their potential, and we give them the tools to reach it. We really need everyone to have a successful life for all the moral reasons, economic and social reasons, and it's because what we're paid to do is to give every child the chance to have a fantastic life. So I'm just going to scroll ahead to a video that I've done and give you the sense of what it might look like if we did this metaphor of transformation using the lunar missions out of the 1960s in the United States. So when John F. Kennedy in early 1960s decided that the US would be the first to put an astronaut on the moon, he found a way to get that to happen with the astrophysicists and rocket scientists of the time. And I'm going to use that metaphor to describe the journeys of your school. I know you'd like me to play the video, except the bandwidth of the audio in some places won't make that possible. So here is Earth. It's looking all round and beautiful for us. And as the scientists at the time decided, they had to find a way to get to the moon, but we didn't have the jet propulsion coming out of the rockets at that time to blast from Earth straight ahead to the moon. So what they configured was the opportunity to go to a stage A, to use centrifugal force and go around the Earth in orbit before actually taking off for the moon. So this first stage of change in your school is launching, getting going. And so in Australia and around a lot of the world, we have been moving toward project-based learning, passion-based learning, moving to new engaging pedagogies, trying to find ways to get kids actively involved in their learning. Just deciding to do that and getting going is stage A. Some of you are in schools where you might still feel you're on the launch pad, and it's a little shaky trying to break through the gravitational forces of the earth, but you may have started. And the journey towards school transformation means we're no longer trying to be the schools we've been, that are places young people go to watch their teachers work, but we're trying to be engaging, passionate learning centers, which are personalized learning and overcoming some inequities of the past. So what they figured out at the time is if they got out of Earth orbit and headed toward the moon, there was a little bit of a problem because actually the moon moved. The moon moves in the time frame, and if they guess wrong, they'll head straight out into the atmosphere and into space beyond, end up in the asteroid belt or something, having missed their target. So how do you plan the change for your school, knowing that the moon will be moving?
Good day, colleagues.
Sorry about that.
It's a pleasure to see
the moon will be moving, and it takes 3 days for the moon, for us to get to the moon. And if we do it wrong, we might overstep and miss, because the moon is moving while we're traveling toward it. So the changes in your school, you may not realize as school leaders. It may be the next principal. It may be the next head teacher that sees it. We'll have a new generation of children. So the changes you're planning in your school are actually ones that will happen as we get to the next phase of change. That's a tricky thing to be a leader, that you may not see out the change because it might be a whole generation. So at the time, that meant we need to make mid-course corrections. And the little mid-course corrections we make allow us to use retro rockets and get to the moon by not worrying that we're 100% there yet. We aim toward it and then make adjustments. So we'll call that step B. A is getting launched. B is mid-course corrections. If I asked you all right now, are you in stage A in your school or B? Some of you might say, well, we've got really good ideas, but we're making some corrections on our way toward our goal being the moon. It's all a metaphor, right? So when we get to the moon, we then land on the moon. Our goal is actually to get back after the moon, not just to get to the moon. And that would be step C, is reestablishing a goal. So many of you are in A, you're at launch. B, you might be making corrections to your school plans to get you there. And C might mean you've gotten somewhere, now you got to go somewhere else, like back home or off to another planet or something. So school transformation is a journey. You with your staffs are on that journey. The goal today is to recognize our mission is school transformation. And the way we do that is with instructional leadership. So I want to take you on a different journey with me now. And this is about, so what does the literature talk about with instructional leadership? In the literature that I've looked at from the Indian ministers of education, who are wonderful, and the rhetoric, and in Australia, the US, around Europe, and other places, often the notion of instructional leadership is very naive. The role principals and school leaders play is extremely complex. If you just look at the situation now, getting schools to teach from home, as well as transition back, that's added burdens to you that were never described in any rule book or handbook that might have been given to you on how to be a school leader. So I'm going to try to make that naive happening a little more realistically. The first thing you need in order to figure out instructional leadership is a vision for your school. Many of you have vision for your school, and it is probably very wonderful. I'm going to propose 2 items that I think you might want to focus on. Number 1 is learning equity. Many of you are in schools where you're promoting learning really well. You've won excellence awards, your teachers are fantastic, you're on driving toward learning. But equity means it's for all, and that we're adjusting our learning for individuals to try to be fair. Learning isn't something that we can do equally because every child is different. So we're not trying to say learning equality, but learning equity, giving every child what they want when they need it. That's a very 21st century concept of teaching and learning, not I teach history the way I teach it, and if not everybody learns it that way, tough. We're now adjusting our pedagogy to meet the way young people learn. And there are emerging technologies which help us with that some of you are in schools that are pioneering. The second thought is then we have to have school designs that enable success. We're going to get into those designs just now. So the job of an instructional leader is to put in place the people and processes that enable engaging, personalized school designs that will allow for the success for all. In many schools, there are pockets of great things happening and individual great teachers who are doing great things to inspire great learning. But it's not necessarily add up to a whole school design of success for all. So in my definition of instructional leadership, you have to start with vision of learning equity. Not learning and equity, but one concept, learning equity. It's a different kind of theme, perhaps. And school leaders have this figurative palette in front of them as they prepare and are painting this picture for the schools. They can use this imaginary color wheel. Picture you're an artist and you have a canvas in front of you to determine what approaches you'd like to take. Is this school primarily to promote academic excellence? Is it a school that cares deeply about student well-being? Does this school promote diversity and social justice? Does this school have students engaged in passionate study inside and outside the four walls of the classroom? These are really key questions of what is this school really for? What are we here to do? And you may have already sorted that, but if not, this might give you a guide to help think that through. The starting of this is creating and sharing around an equity mindset, giving every child what they need when they need it. So the first goal of empowering instructional leadership is fostering vision toward great learning with an equity mantra and an equity mindset. That's to ensure we're meeting the needs of every child, differentiating for children who have special needs, and get learning and teaching right for every one of our learners. So now, what are the levers that you have in front of you? That's the title of this presentation, Levers for Leading. The first lever, or the first color in the color wheel, is pedagogy. And I know you know that word. It's an educational kind of word. But pedagogy really involves the methods, the approaches, the ways, the philosophies, the package of approaches that we use when we engage in teaching and learning. It's the whole toolkit that we teach from that allows us to be fantastic teachers and fantastic leaders in promoting that. So most leaders are using specific pedagogical approaches to drive the change in their schools they'd like. The principled and purposeful learning design and approaches, methods, and assessments. So the major color in our color wheel, the major lever that you have, is pedagogy. Some teachers have a philosophical view of pedagogy grounded in the literature. Others employ an experiential or time-honored view of the kinds of work and activities students do in their classes. Pedagogy drives a school vision forward, but in some schools, the focus of pedagogy is just haphazard. They're kind of making it up as they go, winging it, if I can use that expression, and not intentionally connected to the school's vision. So if you have a vision of learning equity, then you need to drive that with a pedagogy that advances that learning equity. And the notion of a deliberate pedagogy, not just we do it the way we did it because that's how it was done. We're in a very different world in the learning sciences, and many of you have studied that, I'm sure, along the way in your degrees that have helped you get the roles that you're in. So pedagogy is the first and probably most important of the levers. The second is technology. And technology, you know, is changing everything. And many of our young people have access to more technology than they do food. At least around where I teach, there's giant technology opportunities and almost less social ones happening right now. Some principals have chosen that emerging technologies are the first and foremost to have their agendas. Their emerging and immersive can be the catapult to integrate some of the new and old tools that allow us to increase student engagement and thereby learning. The advent of artificial intelligence and virtual reality tools, including mixed reality learning environments, allow us to replace didactic teaching, which I know you know that word, but it's kind of the fancy word for stand and deliver or lecture teaching in the next 10 years. So I think the VR, immersive technology, AI stuff actually means the lecture is dead, and it's going to take us a few more years to replace it. But maybe you figured that out during teaching online, that in fact we can chunk these things out, use some of the technologies, and teachers don't have to be the sage on the stage any longer. So pedagogy, technology, and the third one is space. I know you come from very different parts all around India and the other countries represented, and some of you are in pretty old and clunky school buildings, and some of you are fortunate when the lights work, and others are in elite, very special places that have been purpose-built as wonderful learning centers. But whichever you have, that space is another lever. You have pedagogy, you have technology, you have space. But the physical space is another one of these drivers of instructional leadership that you will have the opportunity to do in your career, where you might get the chance to have a new wing built on your school, or refurbished building, or a brand new school built for 21st century purposes. These new kinds of learning spaces create opportunities for children to be not only seated in better kinds of chairs, but for the whole classroom and experience to be structured in much more dynamic and much more engaging ways. In these new learning environments, gone are the days of the teacher at the front of the classroom with chairs in neat rows. The teacher is more of a guide, a facilitator, a coach, or an orchestra leader, using flexible space to meet the needs of learning outcomes of the day, not as before, where the classroom structure dictates the pedagogy. Can you see how the space is an integral place? So school leaders are now actually being able to think about pedagogy, technology, and space. They're the three lead drivers. And you may not have thought in your school plan or what you meet with your boss about, you're really using one of those three things to deliver your mission. But a lot of the literature now would stop there and they'd say, well, that's all I've got. It's pretty easy. I'm going to either use how I teach, the tools we use, or the space we're in. And think of those three. I'm always manipulating those, or always don't have enough of it. But there's much more complicated, because now it has to get to the people issues to drive those three things. So the first is going to be the notion of support. Many of you come from schools where you spend enormous parts of the day supporting your young people because of the needs they bring to school. Hero teachers and leaders every day taking care of kids who don't have enough food, don't have enough clothes, don't have enough support because just society has maybe left their family behind, or the kids themselves have needs where the schools need to provide that support. So it's more than technology and space and pedagogy. Support includes academic, social, emotional support for learners in the journey. This driver or lever can be providing well-being, extra tutoring, special interventions, all of that to personalize learning. It can mean pastoral care to assist students in negotiating through issues they may not be dealing with at home, or to support them in negotiating growing up in a massively complex society. I know you're aware, but in the upper levels where young people are on certain websites and apps where they're deliberately berating one another and putting each other down or being bullied. Growing up is very hard, and many of you are working with young people negotiating that as much as you are teaching the content and getting them ready for examinations. In Australia, the average teenager is now online 9 hours a day, 3 on social media. That's before COVID. This is a change in the support systems of anxiety and stress and of just overdoing it, as many of us have become addicts. So we have pedagogy, technology, space, and support. Those are different levers that you have. And the fifth one is engagement. Engagement is the opportunity to be positively with parents, carers, and the community. Many of the schools that I work with have done such a good job of pedagogy or space or technology, space or technology, and support, but possibly not as much involved in the community. Getting the support of parents or carers is vital to gain the buy-in to change if you're trying to do any of them different. You're going to incorporate technology different. You're going to build in new kinds of ways to use space, or you're going to be teaching differently using some student-centered approaches. Many primary schools around here have had difficulty getting support for different kinds of teaching because parents want school to look like it did for them. They don't want any of this newfangled stuff. And you may have faced the same thing. The new designs and transformational change might be just beyond the reach of many of the community, and bringing them up to speed of why you're doing things differently can be difficult because parents want what's right for their child, but they also are all experts, as we all are in society, because we all went to school. So we always have somebody looking over our shoulder who knows what we're doing. We do have a lot of parents who want schools to look like it did for them, and we're talking about a very different kind of school now that we're trying to create for a very different kind of purpose. Some of you are engaging with funders and agencies and NGOs to help provide resources, some working with the government, and some with philanthropy and donors to get you some of the new space and some of the new technology, or maybe some of the support teachers. They need to buy into the change because they're valuable partners with you. So pedagogy, technology, space, support, engagement, and professional learning. So none of this can happen if teachers are not equipped to do with what all these other potential things can do. If I don't know how to use the technology, or I'm uncomfortable using new pedagogy, or I keep standing in front of my brass of new space, or I'm not sure how to engage with parents, then all of your plans for your school will fall apart. And the difference today is we can't actually have a weakest link of our teaching staff. Everybody has to be on board. So paramount to pedagogy and technology and space, engagement and support is the professional learning of leaders, staff, and the whole community. This new kind of professional development drives forward the knowledge, skills, and dispositions for understanding what kind of learning we are trying to achieve and what kind of learning environment we are fostering to promote that learning. Without personalized, relevant, and contextualized professional learning, pedagogy, technology, space, support, and engagement just could be a mishmash of incoherence, and it will be a non-contributor to change. Hopefully this presentation isn't one of those opportunities, but most professional learning we involve in actually turns out to be a waste of time. It doesn't engage us, it doesn't change us, it doesn't impress us, it doesn't model for us. And so you need to link your professional learning for your staff directly to your vision, learning equity, or whatever you come up with, and pedagogy, technology, space, support, engagement. So if I was to ask you so far this year, or as we end up heading to next year post-COVID, we hope, have you done professional learning deliberately around these areas and the overlap of these areas? Or is it just a one-off where someone's invited in to do a workshop that has no bearing and won't connect, or it's just about the fad of the day rather than driving these kind of change? My proposal is you should have professional learning across all of these levers for change, not just one of them. And a lot of times we're not thinking holistically. So the last of these levers is staffing, because you can have all the great pedagogy, technology, space, support, engagement, and learning, but it really is about your current staff considering themselves leaders with you in this journey. They're instructional leaders, all staff, including those that work in the office, those that might drive a bus, those that help clean the school. They are all leaders in your school, and any new staff you hire have to come in considering themselves leaders. The most critical element is the talent of your team. And quite often we have not really realized that it takes everybody in the new ways we're trying to do things. So this is the selection of staff and the leadership development of current colleagues. All new staff should be incorporated into the school vision, and they should feel they are a vital part of the change process. Their skill sets and passions are vital to the future of the school. Ongoing staff are leaders, and their classroom and school leadership is paramount. Many classroom teachers see themselves left out, and they don't see themselves as leaders, but they're the most important components of your change process. It only really matters what happens day to day in the classroom. And yet they're the most on-the-ground leaders in the school. The true instructional leaders are your day-to-day teachers, and you know that. It's just the system quite often forgets that, and they may not feel that way about themselves. I'm sure in your schools it's different, so I apologize if I already overtook your wonderful leadership, which has made them feel they are instructional leaders. So here we are. The pedagogy, technology, space, support, engagement, and professional learning are all needed to promote and develop a great staff that drives this. And if I was doing this in real time and we were in the room together, and you may not be able to see me too well on this WebEx, but think of these as also like a juggler having balls in the air. And, you know, I'm not a really good juggler, but I could take one one ball and juggle it over to my other hand. That might be pedagogy. So if all you're dealing with is pedagogy, that's pretty easy. If you add technology, I might be able to do two, but it's going to get tricky after a while. If I add space, I'm already dropping one of those balls in the air or missing one of those levers. When you add support and engagement and professional learning and staff, and when we think this is instructional leadership, this is just one aspect of the job of a school leader. You're managing the budget, you're dealing with safety, you're trying to deal with a pandemic, you're dealing with the day-to-day crisis du jour. All of this is juggling all the time. And this is a very complex role. So what you have to do is then have a team you can count on. And that's where head teachers are so vital, deputies are so vital, to help you not let any of these drop. Which one of these do you want to drop? The support for students, the engagement with community? Do you want to forget about space? Are you going to lose pedagogy? So, and again, if I were juggling right now, all these things would be hitting the floor and I'd be going, oh no. So instructional leaders have a vision for learning equity. They design schools deliberately to enable success, and they understand that in this complexity, we have to do all of this at the same time, which is a very complex task to take upon. You might not have read the fine print in your contract that said you had to be a juggler. We should design schools that are far more than places young people go to watch their teachers work, in dynamic learning environments that are promoting learning and equity for all. School leaders are jugglers with these multiple balls all in the air at the same time, trying to balance pedagogy, technology, space, support, engagement, professional learning, and staffing simultaneously is a big ask. Keeping all the drivers in the air at the same time while painting a unique design for your school is an amazing opportunity for a leader to shape his or her future. The move from old school to new school is an instructional leader's dream. Moving from success for some to success for all allows everyone involved to have a huge stake in the future of a school, its community, and society. So what I've tried to do in the last few minutes is really try to take on board this notion of what instructional leaders do and embed the leaders for learning. And I'm going to end the presentation now, and maybe during the questions come back with a couple of other items that we might be able to discuss. And I really look forward to your questions and your feedback, and appreciate you listening. I know this is an awkward format to do things in, and your video.
Thank you, Dr. John. Would you like me to start giving you questions? I have a lot of questions from
Sure. I am
the
happy to answer
enthusiastic
questions.
teachers across.
I wanted to leave plenty of time for questions and not over talk, but I hope you got the message of the challenges of doing all of this, and maybe I'll be able to sort some of that out in our question time.
All right, perfect. So let me begin with the first question. And this is around how to bring about efficient results in online teaching. So the question is, what levers can be used by leaders for efficient result in online teaching? This is a huge problem being faced by a lot of teachers, how to,
Yeah.
measure the effectiveness of teaching.
Sure. I'm not sure if I still have permission to share my screen. And if you give me about 30 seconds while we chit chat, I'm going to pull up just a couple of slides on that topic. It'll just take me a second. All right. So,
Absolutely. No problem.
no, I think
Thank you,
the
everyone.
question is fantastic. And it really is about how we seize this opportunity. And I just want to make sure as I go through that, I get you a chance to see. I've already prepared some thoughts for that. All right, I'm just going to share my screen again, if that's okay. This isn't going to be that long. Don't panic, everybody. I'm just going to highlight a couple of things here. People go, oh, no, I just heard you presenting too long. So this might not answer your question satisfactorily. I apologize if it doesn't. First of all, none of us signed up for this. So what you're doing now, there isn't a rule book for, we didn't plan for this. If we went back to January, we didn't know this was happening, right? So in that sense, I want you to relax and appreciate all of the heroic things you've done, right? So I know that sounds funny to say, but I think the first thing is for people over worried about assessment and those things is that this is different. You can't try to teach the same things in the same ways. I don't think you can wear responsibility for the various situations that are so different for your learners. And I think this is a chance to try some things new, particularly in formative assessment. You may not be able to feel that the summative assessment is possible in the same way, but formative assessment certainly is. And the second slide I want to show from this other presentation is around future focused learning opportunities that I think you can try. So don't worry as much that that you can't do it all the same way or you're not sure about it all, because you're not really responsible for COVID. We're not actually going to blame you for that. But what you can do is to look at the skills that we're able to process and look at the amazing magic you're creating. We're honoring flexibility. We're accepting change. We're thriving in ambiguity. We're teaching young people self-regulation, which, if you know about the future focus skills, is number one. That's where you take charge of your own learning. Then we're promoting the common good. We're doing this to protect the vulnerable in society. We're trying to keep things going. If young people in January, instead of covering the syllabus all the way through like we might have been, if we knew that we would, to this year, going to help honor flexibility, accept change, thrive in ambiguity, practice self-regulation, and promote the common good, you go, well, that's pretty good. We didn't know we'd have to do it keeping them home, but this is actually a great set of outcomes. So I'll ask you, even though I know this is hard, to not put the pressure on yourself to try to do the same things, but to actually try to take advantage of the time we're in. And it's a very different environment. And I think it's okay that it's different. And those things are the things I've noted in my sessions around the world that teachers are just excited about. So I would embrace it and not put more pressure on yourself. You're already a hero.
Thank you, John. And amazing to see you already prepared for a question, which is
No, I just pulled it out of my file because I'd already done some work on that. Everybody won't get as good an answer.
so every minute I have like questions popping up, and there are so many. I'm trying to do justice for there's so many questions, but since we are talking about effectiveness in teaching, and fantastic answer from you. There is a teacher which just asked, how can we bring about response from children during online teaching? Because the response question is very less.
Yes, so I think we're seeing that this is going really well for some kids who have resources at home. They do have self-regulation. They're in situations where a parent or a carer can be with them to guide them. But we're also seeing that for some of our young people, they're very, very vulnerable. They're vulnerable because they don't have those supports. They may not have the access to the same technology. The parents may be working as first responders, as nurses and carers, and trying to take care of us when we're sick. And that's the young people I worry about the most. What I can tell you is some schools have done what you've probably done, and they're not worrying they're covering the curriculum, but they're trying to provide support. So what I've asked people to do is to not worry if they're not engaged in the online as much as creating things they can do offline. And there's lots of measuring we can do when we make supper. There's lots of reading we can do in things we used to call books. Remember, we used to go to the library and there were books and we read a book. And so you're supposed to read a book to your teddy bear or to your puppy or to your mother or grandmother, whoever you're living with. With technology, if they do have smartphones, and many kids have access through their parents or their own, to make a little video and to upload the video of them telling a story or developing some things, or find all the triangles in your house and take pictures and upload those, to take it away from the online space, turn it into an offline activity, and then create a chance for them to share them back when they can get online. For younger children, it's just really hard because you can't ask a 6-year-old to stay in school all day. So I think we're just going to have to give ourselves a break and do the best we can, but try to find other ways to get them involved, not necessarily on the screens all day, and to think about ways to use the world around them. I came up with a project and was working with a school where we were practicing communication skills and asked them to contact via phone someone in their family who was stuck at home by themselves. It might be somebody in aged care, somebody who was in a different city they hadn't seen, their uncle or their auntie or their grandfather, and they had to prepare a list of the things they wanted to talk to them because they were missing them, or they wanted to ask them about their history of maybe they fought in a war, or maybe they were a leader in their company, or to talk to them and get that information from them and to write that down and then do an oral family history. There's so many things you can do, but I know that's off task from what you would be teaching, but try to take that pressure off. Get them doing something where they're reading, writing, listening, speaking. That's all the skills in literacy right there that they need. And then to present that back to you in another form. Take a photo, upload that. I know that's not a great answer because this is not a great situation.
Speaking of these ideas, can design thinking approach be one of the most effective methods? Like how you said, make triangles and, uh, it is?
Yes, I think design thinking, if you have those skills, would be really good. I think the most important thinking here is that you didn't realize before how appreciated you were necessarily. And now any value you're giving to families and the kids at home is so much more than they would have had. So think of yourself as a first responder providing aid and triage after a tsunami or an earthquake or a storm. You're providing learning where there wouldn't have been anything. And so whatever you're providing is going to not only bring comfort. I also don't believe, except for those most vulnerable children, particularly those with cognitive needs that have specialist teachers to help support them, I don't believe kids will actually fall behind. I know there's a lot of pressure on schools to make sure that kids don't fall behind in basic literacy and numeracy or getting ready for big exams. But my question would be, behind what? What are they behind? I just showed you a list of things that were actually ahead. In 2020, we've done more on self-regulation, critical thinking, and problem solving and ambiguity than we ever have done before. So maybe we're ahead in some things. Not to let there be a sense that this generation is behind. What are we behind? We're ahead. No one in our lifetime has been through a global pandemic. So this group is they've done that, tick the box. Now, this is a really good set of values. Now, there may be some literacy and numeracy and other things we'll want to come back to. I realize that we may fall a little behind in what we'd like. That's easily caught up when we're back in school. And I know in different areas of the countries where we're on, it'll be a little different timing. But let's say it's in 2 months or 3 months it takes to get back in school. Some kids in 2 weeks, fired up and switched on, will be back to normal. So I think it's our most vulnerable, but most children are actually doing quite well. They're excited that you're there. Take the expectations away. Design thinking would be a clever way, but for others that might be intimidating, that they have to learn a new skill. And so I don't want to label it as that's the only way to do it.
Absolutely. Around this, I mean, since we spoke of there are children, there are kids who don't have access to the smartphones, the gadgets, especially those for the rural India students.
Yes. Yep.
So, what any tips, any mantras for those like tools for online assessment there, which could be easily accessible? The idea is that. The educator which has asked this question, she believes that I don't want to burden the students and make them run after, the feeling of that they aren't capable enough in terms of access to these gadgets. And in your diagram, technology was a significant part of pedagogy.
Well, no, it's separate from in that respect. Technology can also be a pencil. Technology is a shoe. Technology is any tool that we use. Technology is sugar and flour in a kitchen lesson in science class, where how do you mix an egg and with some milk and some batter to create an omelet? So we just have to use what's around us. That's technology. And obviously, there's new kinds of technologies back in school that are taking us forward. But all the ones we have at our fingertips are also a traditional book that has a cover and pages in it is a technology. So I think it's about knowing what they have around them and letting that be enough, not that they need something more. And if they have their mind and their inquiry approach, they can ask questions and they can build maybe solutions themselves that I need you to find something in your house that's round. And I need you to measure around. And if you don't have a measuring tape, you can take a string. And if you don't have a string, you could take a belt. And if you don't have a belt, but you have a robe, there might be something on that. You let the kids figure out how they solve what they need, because what you're doing is circumference. And that's, figuring out how the measurement around a circle. Oh, well, do you really care that it's a ball that's orange, or do you just care that it's a ball? I think it's being that open to what it is. Let them use what's around them so that no one has a deficit. And knowing that some kids have 50 balls and other kids will have to figure that out. And then you have to have a backup plan to help them be ingenious about what a ball could look like. I know that sounds easy, and I'm not trying to make this easy.
The problem with this, and this particular question is from a lot of educators participating today, is that how do you measure? Because everyone is finding alternative methods of teaching. How you gave so many examples, they're all under the sun. So how do you standardize the process of examination? How would you really measure the growth or the skill of kindergarten students especially?
Well, the best measurement is teacher judgment. The national test and standardized tests don't do that. In fact, a student of mine here has just demonstrated that between kindergarten and year 11, we can know enough to predict the students here year 12 final marks on the big high stakes exams, that we actually don't need those exams because we can predict it. So number one is teacher judgment. And we're just going to have to rely on that. Number two, and I just don't know in each area what the ministers of education have done, but in Australia, they've relaxed the pressure on the exams. They took them away. They just said, for this year, we're not doing it. Universities are accepting year 11 marks, and teachers are asked to do the marks to progress students through based on their judgment. Actually, teachers are the best judges. So I'm not sure if you have that permission. If not, I'd ask the principals, if the people above them won't get too mad, to really ask for that. If they look across other countries in the world that India is competing with, you'd see the ministers of education have said for 2020, we want teachers to be the determiners of that progress. It's hard to do it when you're not in the room with them, but teacher judgment is the best anyway. We've over-relied on those exams, and I know in a competitive society where everybody's trying to do their best, that's like sacrilegious to say, but what are we going to do? Blame teachers for the fact they haven't been able to do their job 100% and do it in a different way, or blame kids? Remember, a different standard is being met this year. One of resiliency, their ability to cope with change, how they understand how to help people survive a pandemic. So we have all these unaccessible, really, skills. So what we're going to have to do is give each other a break. I know that means coming back. There'll be pressure to go back to the system we had before. And it might be just easy for me to say this. I hope we don't. Those examinations should be formative, and they should help guide teachers' ability to use the information from them to change their instruction. Summative high-stakes assessments create anxiety and stress. They don't create learning. But our society is thinking that it means it evaluates teachers in schools. It actually doesn't. It makes us think we do. It mostly measures the postcode you come from and the wealth of your family. It doesn't measure your capacity and your learning. I'm being out there and provocative. My apologies if I've insulted any of you who have excellent schools and it's all about the test. But the test should be a result, not a purpose. And I think this year we can take them out of the way and be just fine. And I would hope your ministers of education have taken the pressure off of you.
The steps are being taken in few regions. The steps are similar to what you described as of in Australia. The few are work in progress, with the decision making lying in the hands of minister. But CBSE, they're doing a fantastic job in trying to,
Yeah.
keep the sensitivity around this issue. While in India, it's COVID is increasing, in areas like a rapid fire. So it's actually affecting a lot of students as well as teachers.
You cannot be accountable for this pandemic. You can be responsible for doing your best to get kids excited about learning and to keep hope alive. If we do that, we're going to be fine. I know that's about the best we can do. So please take just pressure off yourself that you're failing anyone. None of us signed up for this.
Um, We have had a few questions regarding, kids. Now, there are few principals, head of the schools, concerned about how to improve the culture in such a situation, like where teachers are, they aren't face to face, so there is some sort of groupism. They're not. There is some anti-establishment activities, which is like sort of non-academic, and the situation is now different. So the methods of dealing with such situations would also be different. They're inclined to, how to turn these individuals and motivate them positively, because that's an uphill task. And this kind of leadership is equally important,
Yeah, it's a
on many
great
different
point, and I hope
fronts.
I'm answering the question, so I apologize if not. So, one of the things that schools do so well but don't get credit for is managing social upheaval. Young people who are in gangs, lots of things that are trouble, where they use school as the way to escape from that, and then they go back home, they're probably involved in lots of things they shouldn't be. Now we've just kept them home a long time. So, there's only a couple things we can do because it's sort of out of our control. When I was a teacher, and I still am here at the university level, but I used to find a way to each day catch kids being good. And I know that sounds like a gimmicky strategy, but I'd find at least 3 young people that day who did an amazing job. And I would tell them that, and I'd call up their families. And, I would just say, Leah did a great job today, and she's just a fantastic student. So when I didn't have to call them on good news, I had to build up a rapport. My suggestion is to figure out the students you're most worried about that might have gotten in alternative kinds of behaviors. And since many of us are using technologies like this, I'd invite them to join you for a Principals Leadership Academy where they are helping other students make good choices. Invite them to be your partner. Come online with you and help guide the younger students. Typically, older students who might have options to cause mischief do not want their younger sister or brother to do that. They know really well what poor decisions are. And I'd include them in a leadership group, even if it's virtual and you're not back at school yet to do this, where they're helping younger children make choices. Those choices could be not terrible ones. They could be about just getting off the sofa and doing some exercise. They could be about turning screens off. They could be about checking in with their grandmothers who may be in another village or another city. So it also could be just how we're going to stop trouble so that they're not perpetuating bad behaviors. So my suggestion is you find 2 or 3 a day, you include them in a principals conference with other kids, and take it on straight away. But I know the brilliance of the people online here. They'll take that idea and make it something better than that.
There is a whole lot of conversation in the chat about teachers not having enough flexibility. Uh, so some schools have their fixed pedagogy. So how to maintain uh, what's there and create new pedagogy in that kind of situation?
All right, so good. We're back to the original premise of this presentation. So that's good. I'll shift back into that and we'll go non-COVID for just a minute. So pedagogy is how we do what we do. And I think if you're in a school where the expectation is that teachers do most of the work and students do most of the listening, some of you are in situations where that's what you have to do. It's the expectation of the school. So there's other ways to make that happen. And when I say this, I'm not sure if you have the pleasure of doing some things in time. And so I'm going to again share my screen. I'm going to share an example. It's going to be a dumb example, but just because I didn't prepare perfectly for this question, if you don't mind, I'm just going to jump in and share you one that I've come up with, and it'll just be a second. So one of the things I want to mention is the way in which practically means that nobody remembers almost anything we teach within 2 weeks. And I know that's rude to say, but only 5% of what we get from a lecture we remember 2 weeks later. 10% from reading, 20% from audiovisual, 30% from a demonstration, 50% from a group discussion, 75% when you practice it. 90% happens when we just turn to each other after something's presented and we teach it to them. So one answer to the question pedagogically is to break up your lectures into small chunks where at the end of a new concept, students have to repeat it. You might call it an A-B group, where you're in A and I'm a B, and at the end of a few minutes, A teaches the B, and then another few minutes, B's teach the A, and the teacher rotates around. So even if you're stuck in a traditional pedagogy, you can break up the information exchange, because if you don't get them to actually teach it to someone else, meaning their partner, they're not going to remember it. And so we're actually fooling ourselves that we're teaching. We're just going through the motions. I know that's crazy. This is another way to picture that. 2 days later, without reinforcement, we've already lost 60% of anything we learned from a didactic approach. And within 2 weeks, it's down to 80 to 90%. So my first answer is they're not going to remember it anyway. But so break it up and try to get them teaching it with a different kind of approach. It doesn't take longer to do that. You just break it up. The other example I want to give is this generation, and I know your generation similarly, is we used to read and then sometimes we watched. Many of you are from different generations, but my generation of baby boomers and those that just come after, we read books and sometimes we watched. It was mostly clunky videos that were on old-fashioned tape. This generation watches first. So if you can build in before you get into the traditional lessons, some watching, students watch and then they'll read, because at least most students don't read the same way they did in the past because they're watching so much. YouTube example, right? And most of what made Instagram popular and what makes TikTok popular, it's all watching, right? It's not reading. We've moved platforms of watching. So if you need to let your students watch to read. Doesn't mean we don't want reading. This is the dash in my car. It has all these buttons in it. I don't know what they do. I'm driving this car all over. I've never wrecked anywhere. I think they evolved taking the power of the car and making it more fuel efficient. And imagine if a pilot on the plane, she gets in the cockpit, pilot to co-pilot, what are these buttons for? Like, I have buttons in my car. I don't know what they are. This is the manual in my car. I took a picture of this when I designed this part of the presentation. I never read my auto manual, when in the past I had a 1968 Ford Mustang, which was the bomb of a car. It was awesome. I read that manual. I could fix that car. I knew it inside and out, and I knew what was in the manual. Now I don't need it. I just drive it. So I'm even guilty of that. Just as if we got a desk from a store and we were putting it together, I would not read the instructions. I'd watch the YouTube video, and I bet you would as well. So try to think about how to build in visual pedagogy, which you may be doing during COVID, and not give that up, because students are watching to read. This is really hard to do, and this is a long answer, I realize, but it's a really good question. You may have studied in your teacher education program, the Bloom's taxonomy from Benjamin Bloom. This is just a graphic design where it starts at knowledge on the bottom of the light bulb and goes up to evaluation. Most of us are teaching at the lower level because we're assessing at the lower level. It's easy to mark right and wrong answers. It's tougher when you go up to the tougher upper levels of synthesis and evaluation. My recommendation is you try to go one layer higher and try to get more, which is either to teach someone else, which I recommended a minute ago, or try to get them to do a little bit more deeper understanding. And that takes just a bit more time. It doesn't take as much time as going further up. And moving up one level on Bloom is my recommendation. Bloom is from 1954. There have been new versions of Bloom. I'd use the original one. Just Google it if you didn't study it in school. My final example is a really weird one, and my apologies. So let's say this was in the syllabus. I'm guessing it's not. But the English word protagonist, if I was throwing it out to our 1,200 viewers right now, or however many people are online, what I'd suggest is you might be able to tell me what a protagonist is if I quizzed you on that. I haven't taught it to you, and I don't want to put you on the spot, so I'm not going to ask you. But a protagonist is the person in the story that the story centers around, the arc of the story, the principal character, the good guy, so to speak, right? So I've just taught you protagonist. Do I need to teach you what antagonist is, or do you already know that just by your cleverness? And my guess is most students will say, oh, I know the protagonist is the bad guy, if protagonist is the good guy. And in every famous piece of literature across the world, you'll find a protagonist if it's classic literature. Right? In a Shakespearean play, Romeo and Juliet, who are the protagonists? Oh yeah, they'd be Romeo and Juliet. Right? So now I'm going to give an activity. Now again, the trade-off is time here, I realize. the movie Titanic, which even young people today know about because of streaming. This is Jack and Rose, the two lead characters. Are you familiar with the movie Titanic? Most people are. It was one of the biggest grossing movies of all time, right? And so is Jack the protagonist, Rose the protagonist, or is the ship Titanic the protagonist? So I've just told you what a protagonist is. And now we know the movie. And I could argue it's the ship. It sinks, by the way. Sorry, I didn't mean to spoil it for you. I could argue it's Jack. James Cameron, who made the film, thinks it's Rose. Indu, who just texted in, I think, thinks it's Rose as well. And Rose is in her old age at the beginning and end of the movie. But I could argue that I don't really like the way that movie ends, right? I think it doesn't make it clear it's Rose. Because Jack actually could have fit on that door in the ocean when the ship sank, by the way. There was plenty of room. Some people have organized it. Jack did not have to die. I don't know what Celine Dion would have done. She wouldn't have had a famous song if he hadn't died. Heart Will Go On, but it didn't have to happen that way. So my suggestion is rewrite the final scene to highlight who you think the protagonist is. And so what I'm asking teachers to do, rather than just teach about protagonists, get students to apply that. Go one step more on Bloom. And you'll get much more deeper meaning and much more deeper learning. Now that example is showing also that that's the tension between breadth and depth, because by teaching protagonist for a half a day or a day while all that happens, you've not taught something else. And that tension is what teachers always feel. Breadth, which is I have to teach a lot of things, and depth, I want to do them well. But if we're really going to promote learning, we'll have to decide what not to do so that students can go deeper. So find those core concepts in your syllabus, do those a lot, and leave out the rest because those aren't assessed anyway. We often think we have a lot to teach, and it's just because we hadn't realized what we really need are those big key concepts. So there's an answer that you didn't know was coming at you. It involved Titanic and protagonist and who knows what else.
That was a really good one. I just wanted to check with you. Are you happy to continue the session? Because we have another half an hour blocked, or I mean, how would you like to take this forward?
Yeah,
because questions.
Scheduled till 5:15 is what at our time here. I'm not sure what time that means if you go to afternoon there or not, whatever you would like.
So another 13 minutes to go from here. Is that what you?
No, another 15 minutes or so, and then wrap it up, whatever. I'm open.
Sounds good. So we'll take it for another 15 minutes then.
Okay.
There is a question, actually two questions around how to give individual attention to the students while transforming pedagogy online. And similar to this lines, not just because they want to transform pedagogy, there is another set of educators who are asking because there are different levels of children and the class consists of different types of kids as well. So how would we deal with this?
So that question is always relevant, whether we're in COVID time or not, because there's kids always at different levels, and it's the job and masterfulness of teachers. It's particularly hard from home because we can't do our magic of understanding exactly where they are and helping them. I think I have to come back to the original answer from the very first question. I don't think you can try to do the same things. Some of you know students because you've been with them a bit during the year, and you can know where they are, and others you didn't get to know enough before we went into COVID. So I think what we have to do now is take an enormous leap of faith, give students the flexibility to respond in whatever way they can, give lots of flexibility in how they can answer the questions or do the prompts, and give yourself huge forgiveness because you can't do the same things. And it's not I know your heart makes it responsible, but it just can't be. There are kids who are vulnerable academically because they learn a little slower. They need a little extra help. And all I can tell you is in your own mind, provide options that say, if you get done with this by chance, get back to me, I'll have a follow-up. And if you don't, it's okay. I don't have two versions at least of what you're preparing, one a little faster and one a little slower. Or you can always say to your kids who are highly motivated, you know what I need you to do? I need you to read. Do you know the best way to improve literacy? It's to read. And it doesn't matter what you're reading. read, 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 and you'll be okay. So in fact, for your highest achieving, most nervous students, I would tell them the best thing you can do is get offline and actually read. I know that it's not a cop-out answer. There is no magic wand here. I do actually have a magic wand. It's kind of looks very pitiful, but a year 2 student made it for me a while back. So I can't wave my wand here and make anything go away. I think you just got to do your best to say, I trust you'll put your best motivation to this thing and do your best, and know that some will and some won't. My son-in-law teaches PE in a primary school in the US, and he can get his year 1, 2, 3, 4 students fully involved in his lessons. Years 5 and 6, they're just not participating. And it's not, I'm not happy with that. He's not happy with that. He's got about 4 out of 24 students who actually are doing what he asks. And he's worried about them, but he's doing the best he can.
Very, very cute gift that your year 2 student made. That was really
Yeah.
nice for you to share with everyone.
His colleague's daughter came to a presentation of mine where I talked about the magic wand, and so she made me one so I wouldn't have to wave my arm around.
Nice one. Speaking of, student-teacher relationships, there's a question: how can we build strong relationships in teachers and students in the current time?
Well, the number one thing we can do is to know how appreciated we are. I think teachers have been underestimated for their value. And so know how much your love and your care of young people is matched by their love and care of you, even if they didn't show it. They are missing you and needing you. There are some schools around here who have sponsored events, like Read with the Principal, and you have to book it. And so you get the chance to, instead of being in school, the principal's reading a book with a student for younger kids. There's schools which have been able to make a drive-by to many students' homes and to just leave a little flower or a trinket at their kids. Now it's tricky because you don't want to create social distancing that's not allowed, and in different parts of the countries on here it may not be permissible. There's other schools that have they've continued to have assembly. And in that assembly, they've just tried to make it as normal as possible and call out great success, and the kids feel belonging. I'm not sure if you can have, in certain cases where your older kids are looking out for the younger ones, so you get them a mentor. So you might be assigned to mentor me, and you get online and say, how's it going? And you provide support. I just think use your imagination to make sure there's still a sense of an invisible thread that schools provide to society that is often underestimated, but is absolutely keeps us going. And just know how much you're missed. It's really hard.
Speaking of wonderful ideas that you just shared, should there be fixed goals, parameters where teachers can sort of assess themselves, if they're doing great or fine, or they could improvise someplace?
I think we're not at this time. That shouldn't be the pressure. The job always of a teacher is the results shouldn't be the purpose. So what our job is as teachers is to design engaging lessons around key learning concepts or outcomes that get students actively involved, right? So that's our job. We're supposed to design lessons that get kids involved around things they're supposed to learn. The results of that are only part of our responsibility ever, because we only see them in a regular school time. We only see them about 25% of their day, 75% of the time they're not in school. So we're only ever partially responsible for results. Sometimes the society thinks we're 100%. So in that sense, I think we can't put more pressure on ourselves, except did we plan something interesting and engaging based on the learning outcomes, and it was clear and out there in the system that we can use, and give it a go. We can't be responsible in giving ourselves a frowny face or a -2 or a minus for a situation we didn't create.
Thank you, Professor John. This has been great. So this class, this master class is the last one, and I'm super proud to be hosting it with you. And there are numerous, like hundreds of comments in the chat section about how great the class is. I'm going to close the session with the last question and a very special one. So this question is for the special need kids. How do we tackle that? Your advice, your tips, and in your experience, pedagogy for that.
So I think there's two kinds of answers. One is if you know the learner and know what their special need is, or if they just might have come to your school and you were still trying to get to know them when you had to go from home, because I think they're different answers. And if I can divide specialness into two categories, even though that's very rude of me to do, one would be a physical handicap, where they just don't have the motor skills to do some activities. That's relatively easy to adjust any lesson to. If you could just vary it for those needs, you know already that they wouldn't be able to physically potentially do something. For a cognitive disability, quite often those are very mild, and those students either are perpetuating a hyperactivity or some kind of issue where on the spectrum of autism, where they might be worked up and anxious a lot, or maybe unable to function kind of as normally in a group, and they're better to do things alone. For those kids, pretty much the same assignment will work, but with the reality of their understanding of how they'll make meaning of it. So they operate with a lot of pressure. They put a lot of pressure on themselves. They're probably feeling guilty about it. So I think you have to give flexibility that they or their parent, if there is one there, can adjust the assignment to their needs for them, because there's not you there to do it. So I think it's tailoring the assessment that might come for the lesson. For a child who is pretty severely cognitively impaired, this is a very difficult time, and I'm really worried for them. I don't know if you have plans for how any interventions can happen, but for many of them, they have complex medical needs, and I'm really worried that they're okay. They'll be okay, and you'll be able to catch up with them, but I think those are the ones I worry about the most. But for most kids who are able to do a lot of the things, it's just adjusting to what's there. And I think it's making it simple, not complex. Assuming that they're living in an apartment or in a house or in some kind of accommodation, depending on where their situation is, there's things around them. And if we're doing anything in simple math, they can always be measuring, they can always be observing, they can always be counting. Those things are easy to do. If it's in literacy, we just need them to read. Whatever level they are, keep reading. If they need more books and you can ship any through the online portals, that's great. If there's any way to drop things off, that's great. I'm not sure if any of that's feasible. It is in certain parts, I know, of the country, then it isn't. If there is a parent or a carer, then that's easier. If there's not, but there's an older brother or sister, I think this is a gut check. They're going to have to step up. During World War II, we had a bunch of heroes step up to save the world from fascism. We're not talking about that right now. Who knows down the road, given some countries and how it's going. So what we need them to do is step up and be a role model. I need you for the next hour to tutor your sister. She needs you. And they'll take the teacher's word more than they would the mom's word, probably. We need you to help. And you're going to help by also practicing your literacy skills with your brother or your sister. They'll respond to that. Kids will step up. We just got to ask them to. So I know that's not an answer. That's actually, John has a book on how to help in a pandemic, serve special needs kids. We're going to reach out and we're going to come up with ideas, and then we're going to see who can help. And I think in many families where there's several kids around, we may have to be very stern with them and say, now's the time we need you guys, and we'll celebrate with you later. We're going to need you to help. And some of that can happen in tools like this, even if there's the only child in the house, where they could be online to listen to the child, read a book, or to talk to them about a story, or just to listen. I think anything we're doing is better than nothing. And so again, that's not a perfect mapping to the syllabus. I don't know how the test is going to go later on this year and next. Don't worry about all that. Just do something that's meaningful, that promotes learning, creates caring, and keeps them excited that there will be a post-COVID. There will be. It's going to take till there's a vaccine. I will tell you, Australia and New Zealand have done so well because we stayed in. We stayed in early and we got to the other side, but it's still potentially another wave that could come if we drop it. I also like the fact that kids are learning responsibility, that it's important that we wash our hands, that we take care of each other, that we just do the right thing. And boy, that would be great if we build a better society as a result of this.
There is definitely a silver lining to this pandemic situation, wherein the whole global education community has come together and is focusing and refocusing on learning methods and effectiveness of their own education for children and special children.
Yes.
Educators are definitely no less than heroes. And thank you for being our hero today for this session. I have some fantastic comments. So for the session, it was really good. Thank you for the session. Wonderful series. Thanks a lot. They're all for you, Professor John. So let me close the session by saying a big thank you to you. And I'm sure all the participants enjoyed the session. We would like to conclude this masterclass now. We will send you the recording of the masterclass in the next couple of days. You will receive a link to the quiz for all the sessions by Friday this week. Uh, Thanks a lot and have a great day ahead. And you have a great evening,
Yeah.
Professor
Thank you
John.
for having me. It's a pleasure to be with you. And thanks for all you're doing.
Thanks for giving us a lot of your time.
No, it's my honor.
Bye bye.
Bye.